soap, and it's that the Apache used on an almost daily basis to wash themselves and their hair. As the Apache roamed this area, they built temporary shelters called Wickiups, which in later years they covered with tarpaulins because it was quick and easy when they were on the run. The basic structure of the Wickiup is made from this stuff, desert broom, which is long and flexible. Now those are qualities that aren't easy to find in the desert, where trees have a tendency to be hard, brittle and short. On top of that, I'm putting this squaw bush, which is perfect for just giving it structure, before lastly thatching it with this stuff, bear grass. Bear grass is as tough as hell. I struggled to pull it up until I discovered that a good kick at the root really did the job. Well, that's it completed. A Wickiup like this is a lot of work for one person to build, but it shows you what can be done. In a real crisis, obviously, something acceptable could be knocked together much more simply, but using the similar techniques. Well, that solar still's been going all day now, so there should be a drink in there. But my experience of these, there's one thing I'll guarantee: there won't be enough water in there to keep me alive for any great length of time. So really, in truth, these devices are just stopgap measures. Well, as I thought, barely a mouthful, and not really worth the effort it took to make. This is agave stalk. That's real Apache food. Now, obviously I can't eat it raw, so what I'm going to do is put it on the coals of my fire and cook it overnight. Tomorrow it'll be sweet, sugary, and great food to carry on the trail. Camping here is eerie. I can sense the ghosts of the families that used to live here. It's impossible not to feel a sadness for the way they were removed. Next morning it's into the Chiricahua Mountains and a very different landscape. You can easily imagine how difficult it was for the cavalry to pursue the Apache up here. Now that I'm coming up into the mountains, I'm seeing all sorts of different plants. This one here is Mullen, and it's this plant that I'd use up here to make fire with a hand drill. The old leaves have also got uses. The Apache used to smoke these for bronchial disorders. And if you're short of loo paper, well, it's the leaves of the young plant that are just perfect. I'm at 8,500 feet, looking south into Mexico and the Sierra Madre Mountains. It's a lot cooler, and the Apache would have spent long periods of the year living here, taking advantage of the more forgiving environment. It was from these mountains that they launched countless raids into Mexico to steal horses and weapons. But I've got to go back down to the desert floor, heading for Skeleton Canyon. There are quite a few myths in the world of survival, and one of them surrounds this sort of cactus, a barrel cactus. Many survival books will tell you can cut the tops off of them, take the pulp inside, squeeze it in a bandana and get a useful drink from it. Well, most barrel cacti contain oxalic acid, which is poisonous. This one could give you a drink because this is the Fishhook Cactus, but you're not going to get enough water to keep you alive for any great length of time. The way to get a drink from this cactus is to use it to point you in the right direction, because they grow leaning south or southwest, and that's a handy compass when you're out in the bush. It pays not to take the thorns in the desert for granted. That is a prickly pear thorn, and it's really easily gone through the leather of my boots. In fact, my boots have had a fairly hard time of it. Look, They're absolutely falling apart already. It's a real shame, they're my favourite ones too. Never mind, I'm going to have to wear these instead. These are Apache moccasins. And the interesting thing is that a soldier who worked with the Apache Scouts in the 1880s said that of all of their equipment, nothing was as more important to them than those. And having seen all the thorns in this desert, I can well understand why. There's an old saying, never judge a man until you've walked a mile in his moccasins. So for the last few miles of my journey, I've ditched my rucksack and I'm carrying only what the Apache would have had. This is that agave I cooked on the fire last night. It's perfect now and sweet, good to eat. I can dry it and keep it like this for several days. It's almost a perfect trail food. This may just look like another rocky outcrop, but during the Indian Wars it held great strategic value for both sides. This is Mud Springs. People have been coming here for centuries, and many of these holes here are grinding holes which predate the Apaches. You can still see the graffiti left here by the soldiers sent to fight the Apache. This place was really important during the Indian Wars because this was permanent water. Both the Apaches and the cavalry used this on many occasions. So I'm really pleased to be here. There's a lot of history. I want to have a good look around. It's hard to imagine now how those wars were, but water was always the key thing, just as it is for me hiking through the desert. When the Apache broke out of the reservations, the army used to send mounted patrols out to guard known water places like this. And the Apache, well, if they came across a good source of water, once they'd had their fill, sometimes they'd poison it with the carcass of a dead coyote. I'm almost at the end of my journey, with only a few more miles to Skeleton Canyon, a place that holds special significance. This walk has been more than just filmmaking. Travelling here with Apache skills has heightened my respect for this land. I can now understand why the Apache found no threat here, but instead spiritual enrichment, while their enemies found only suffering and hardship. This pile of rocks is the end of my journey. This is a guarded site because this is the very place where Geronimo surrendered. In many ways, this was the end of his journey too, and the end of the struggle of the wild Apache peoples. But wherever you go in the world, people know the name Geronimo. On his last raid, a handful of warriors outsmarted a quarter of the US Army before choosing to surrender. It remains the most powerful demonstration of the value of survival skills. Next week, one of the most inhospitable places on Earth.